In this video, we are going to figure out what the polynomial function is and also sketch its graph given the zeros. So again, we need to realize and remember that the word zero is a nickname for where y equals 0. So the other important concept with this is that's the same as x is some value and y is 0. So taking this concept of x comma 0, so I'm going to write it like this. We have x comma 0. So y is the 0, which means each of this have to be the x. So what do I have here? I have 3 comma 0, 3 comma 0, and negative 3 comma 0. So notice I have to write this twice. This is called a double root, and we'll see what that looks like when we talk about multiplicity. So in order for me to write the polynomial function, I have to write each of these as a factor. So I'm going to write x equals 3, x equals 3, and x equals negative 3, because that's, again, definition of 0. So remember, when we had a factor, we would have something like, let's say I had x minus 6 is a factor. Remember, I set that equal to 0, then I added 6 to both sides, so then I had x was equal to 6. So notice that this case, what we're doing is we're actually going to go back up this way backwards. So here it's already in the form of a 0, but I want to make it back to look like something like this, which means this has to become a 0. So to make 3 a 0, I'm going to subtract 3. What I do on the right, I have to do on the left. So that gives me x minus 3 equals 0. So what I've just done right now is that this here is a factor. The same thing applies here. So x minus 3 equals 0. This here is my other factor. And on this one I have to add 3 to make it become a 0 on the right. So that gives me x plus 3 equals 0. So this here is another factor. So in factored form, let's write this like this. In factored form, I have the equation y equals x minus 3, x minus 3, and x plus 3. So if you remember from the previous video, I can tell you what degree function this is. This has an exponent of 1, exponent of 1, exponent of 1, which means that this here is a third degree polynomial. And I know it's positive because none of my lead coefficients, there's no negative here, there's no negatives in front of any of the x's, so I also know that it is positive. Okay, so let's go ahead and do what we were asked to do. We want to write the cubic polynomial function. I'm going to assume that means in standard form. Right now we have it in factored form. We can only multiply two numbers together at a time, which means I'm first going to multiply those two numbers first. So we're going to do this by distribution the first time through. So that means I'm going to do x times x, which gives me x squared. Then I'm going to do x times negative 3, which gives me negative 3x. Then I'm going to distribute the negative 3 through. So negative 3 times x gives me negative 3x, and negative 3 times negative 3 gives me positive 9. So I have to remember and realize that these are like terms, so those can be combined. So that means these binomials multiply to the trinomial x squared minus 6x plus 9. And then I still have this binomial that has to come down. And I still have my y equals. So I'm close to being done. So the next method I'm going to use to multiply, I could use distribution, but it can get a little messy, or I can simply do it as a box. So I'm going to do it as a box. I'm going to do it over here, which means I'm going to rewrite this as x squared minus 6x plus 9. That's my trinomial, times my binomial, which is x plus 3. Notice I always put the sign of the number in the front, not in between. So now I can go ahead and draw in my box. I always draw my box in last, and I always make sure I write my numbers big enough so that my boxes are big enough for me to see what I write inside. So now let's go ahead and multiply the outsides to the inside. So x squared times x is x cubed. Negative 6x times x is negative 6x squared. 9 times x is 9x. X squared times 3 is 3x squared. Negative 6x times 3 is negative 18x. And 9 times 3 is 27. So now I have to take it out of the box by adding all of the terms. But I'm going to do my peanut right here. So you can see that the peanuts are like terms. So I'm going to go ahead and take these things out of the box. So what do I have? I have x cubed. Then I combine these two together. So 3x minus 6x squared. 3x squared minus 6x squared gives me negative 3x squared. And then if I have negative 18x and 9x, that gives me negative 9x. And then I have plus 27. So this is y equals. So this here is a cubic function in standard form. So how do I know it's standard form? This is a bit of a review. Let's look at my exponents. They descend 3, 2, 1, and 0. So they're going down, they're in standard form. So let's go ahead and sketch this function. Notice I don't even need to use a calculator just to sketch the function. So like we did in the previous video, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to draw in my XY axis. I'm going to mark my zeros. My zeros are important. So I had a 0 at 3. So this is 1, 2, 3. So I have a 0 here at 3. And in fact, that 0 happens 2 times. And then here I have a 0 at negative 3. So here I have a 0 at negative 3. 1, 2, 3. Okay. So in the past, we've learned that when we have an exponent of 3, we typically have 3 zeros. In this case, I'm only showing 2, but you have to remember that this one here is what's called a double root. And I'm getting ahead of myself, but this means that it has a multiplicity of 2. So let's just kind of back up a bit and let's look up here how we wrote this. There's another way I could have written this, and I could have written this right here to be y equals x minus 3 squared, because it's multiplied to itself twice, and this is x plus 3. So this here is where my multiplicity of 2 is coming in place, right here. So a multiplicity of 2, which we'll see in the next video, means that I'm either going to just simply have a touch here, or I'm going to have a touch here. So let's go ahead and figure out which directions our ends go. So I said it was a positive function, which means we're going to think positive slope. So when I think positive slope, I'm thinking this, and this means that this end goes up, and this end goes down. So this here goes with x is -3. This has a multiplicity of 1, which we'll see in the next video, means that it's like a straight line going through. Remember, I'm using the word like. It doesn't mean it is. So this is going to go up like this, and then somewhere it's going to turn, and it's going to come down here, just touch, and go up. So in the next video, I'm going to show you why I know this is. Granted, we're building on. So again, I just want to emphasize that this here is a sketch. Notice I didn't put any values at all on my y-axis, and so I just sketched that the cubic function by giving just the zeros of the function.